리플의 최고 법률 책임자 스튜어트 야드로티. 그는 SEC가 말하는 모순은 무엇인지, 그리고 리플이 왜 이 소송에서 승리할 수밖에 없는지 우리에게 해답을 주고 있습니다. 그가 주는 리플에 대한 확신을 살펴보고 당신의 펀더멘탈을 지키세요.
We just received our major payments license from the Monetary Authority of Singapore after 3 years of due diligence. We're applying for a license in the UK, in Ireland that will passport through the EU, and Dubai. What we're saying is a regulatory agency like the Securities and Exchange Commission, it's in their name. They only have jurisdiction over securities. And if it's not a security, you don't have jurisdiction over the asset. And let's figure out who has jurisdiction over the asset. That's the piece that's the gray area they're playing in, pretending through regulation by enforcement that they have this jurisdiction when they really don't have it. So, George read the mission of the SEC, and unfortunately, while that looks pretty on their website, all of their actions when it comes to crypto are having the exact opposite effect. Consumers are not being protected. All of the crypto bankruptcies that we've seen in the US, the consumers are left holding the bag in bankruptcy court, last in line as unsecured creditors. Bad actors are not being kept out of the system. See Sam Bankman-Fried on trial as we speak. Capital market formation, VCs are not leaning in to this industry in the US for fear that all roads will lead to the SEC. So they're doing just the opposite. As I said earlier, regulation by enforcement is a really important term. I like it for a whole bunch of reasons, not the least of which is the SEC hates it, and they say that we're not engaging regulation by enforcement. We're just enforcing the laws, and the laws are clear, and that's the problem. Not only are the laws not clear when it comes to how to apply the securities laws to crypto. We have a regulatory gap that the SEC itself recognizes, and we know that because we got their emails. But we also know that because the SEC has been working intentionally, at least since 2015, to foster greater uncertainty in the marketplace. And again, we have that from their internal emails. We know that the general counsel of the SEC advised senior officials at the SEC that they are fostering greater uncertainty rather than bringing clarity. And George, I think you'll appreciate this point given the work you do. A regulator likes uncertainty because they can play with uncertainty by not defining the rules and therefore punish the market through this regulation by enforcement. And if you get an SEC enforcement letter, investigative subpoena, it's a very expensive and grueling process. The process becomes the punishment. Our CEO has been very public that our defense against the SEC has cost us well over $100 million, approaching $150 million. Very few startup companies or privately held companies have those sorts of resources, and that's what the SEC counts on, that they'll surrender through a settlement, and then they can point to the settlement and you say, see, the laws are clear, but that's not clear laws. That's basically leveraging the uncertainty to bully smaller players and either, as I say, force them offshore, force them into a settlement, or force them into bankruptcy court. Their job is to apply law, not to make law. And I think the agency's lost its way because it's trying to make law through regulation by enforcement, and that's unconstitutional. And the third thing, when you're faced with regulation by enforcement and regulatory overreach, fight. Defend yourself. Don't surrender. Which is what Ripple chose to do, which is what our CEO chose to do, what our chairman chose to do, who are named personally in a non-fraud case. There's never been a crypto case in the United States where individuals have been named along with the company with no allegation of fraud. They did it in our suit. Why did they do it? To try to bring us to our knees and surrender, and we didn't. So we fought them, and we won in a very important way. SEC wanted the court to rule that the digital asset itself was something called a crypto asset security. That's the phrase they use. And what the court ruled on July 13th, and by the way, when I got notice of the decision, I was here in Toronto, so good news there. What the judge ruled on July 13th was that the digital asset XRP is not in and of itself an investment contract, because it doesn't embody those bundle of promises that you need to get to an investment contract. That's huge. That was the gut punch to the SEC. That took the wind out of their sails for their entire campaign of regulation by enforcement. They hate that ruling because it destroys their narrative. And what the judge said, let me look at the different categories of distributions from 2013 to 2020. She found some of those distributions, early distributions that were made directly to institutional buyers combined with a contract, those were investment contracts. But other things like trading XRP on Coinbase, not an investment contract. Because when you go and you buy a digital asset on a Coinbase, you don't know who the buyer is, and the buyer doesn't know who the seller is. And the seller's not making you any promises, and you're not relying on anything other than, you may buy it for speculation, relying on market forces, you may believe in the technology, who knows, but it says that's not a contract for an investment. Also, if you give away XRP to developers by way of grants, to executives by way of compensation, to charities by way of charitable giving, not an investment contract, because they're not even an investment of money. So what the judge said, look, the asset itself, never an investment contract.
Well, I just want to say that, in my opinion, the behavior of the SEC set back the innovation in the crypto space decades in the United States, which is a horrible thing. And my question is, do you think in the future cryptos will be regulated by the CFTC rather than the SEC? Or will there be a new department, or there will be no regulators at all for cryptos?
Yeah, well, God forbid, we don't want a new regulator. Whether it's this, to me, I think ultimately there could be shared jurisdiction between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. But we need a clear regulatory framework for that shared jurisdiction to allow the technology to work while serving those policy goals. So I think ultimately, hopefully through legislation, we could get to some shared regulatory framework.
Does it matter that the US is crypto antagonistic if the rest of the world is getting on board?
The United States is still the largest economy in the world. It still has massive influence. It still is very fertile ground for entrepreneurs, engineers, people with bigger brains than me. So you would like to see the US come along. And that's why I think at the end of the day, it does matter. The US has to get it right.